Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We've got Nick Farabaugh on with us today. I want to talk to Nick now that we now know all of the Steelers' top 30 draft visits. Who among them are the Steelers' primary choices, and who outside of them could be the players that they're still looking at? Other smokescreens that Omar Khan in the front office is putting up. We'll do that next year on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you a daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And as said before, we're joined by the man himself, Nick Farabaugh of PennLive.com. Nick, we got to talk about the Steelers' top 30 visits, because we now know who all of them are. They're not all complete technically, as Darius Alexander has to show up, but the Steelers now have basically scheduled all of them, and they've been made public. So we now know who the Steelers are looking at, what their primary concerns are for the top 30 visits. Before we get into who they didn't pick, let's talk about who they did here as far as all of their top 30 visits here. Nick, is there sticking to the first round prospects, is there a consensus that you feel like points in a specific direction, or are the Steelers, have they positioned themselves where they could go in so many different directions that it's not easy to look at them this year as a predictable situation?
It's not easy, because they've hosted a first-round wide receiver, a first-round safety, a first-round edge rusher, a first-round defensive tackle, 2 first-round QBs, and then you have a bunch of other fringe guys, first-round running back in Omar Hampton, and then you have guys like Trey Amos, Jaden Higgins, Travion Henderson, who are kind of on that first-round fringe type deal. And so they're all over the place, man. It's like the most all over the place I can remember this being. Remember last year was like, it's going to be offensive line. It was just if it was offensive tackle or center, right? It was one of those two. The year before, it was pretty obviously going to be an offensive tackle. This year, where? I mean, they could go, that's what, 7 or 8 different spots they could end up going. And so you look at it in the range of the guys is all over the place too, right? You got guys like, I talk about on the fringe, but you also got bona fide true first rounders: Matthew Golden, Nick Iamaleava, Shamar Stewart, Derek Harmon, Shedeur Sanders. You got guys that are definitely going to go in the first round in there too. So it's very odd, but I think if you pepper them across like that, it tells me they're looking at BPA, different options. It also, to me, kind of signals potentially a trade back scenario.
And see, that's the really interesting thing here, is that the trade back does line up there. Looking at the guys that they've interviewed that project to be just outside of the first round, or day 2 picks who might not be available for the 83rd overall pick, your Jaden Higgins, your receiver out of Iowa State, your Trey Harris, your Savion Williams, a lot of those guys, like maybe not Savion Williams, but a lot of those guys look like they could be gone by the time that they pick at 83. I'd even say that, some of the running backs they're looking at: Quinshawn Judkins, Travion Henderson, one of their top 30 visits. Judkins not a top 30 visit, but someone I think that they consider as well. Caleb Johnson, Dylan Sampson, all those guys I think could be off the board by the time the Steelers get a real chance to pick at 83, which means they need to move up on day 2. And if they're moving up on day 2, their primary assets are either trading away players or trading back their first round pick. And to me, I think trading back the first round pick is probably a more welcome situation to the Steelers front office.
Yeah, and it is. And, other 30 visits that I threw in there: Trey Amos, Zaire Thomas. If they like one of those lengthy corners, both those guys, are, I think Thomas is probably later second, but Amos is on that fringe first round, early second type deal. He's in that kind of vortex. I think all the quarterbacks we've talked about, I think, guys like Milroe, guys like Shuck, they're not going to make it to 83. So if they really like one of those guys and they're going to recoup another day 2 pick to land one of them at quarterback, that's another thing to look at. I even look at, the defensive tackle. Darius Alexander, as you mentioned, is kind of in that weird spot. Like, he's basically projected to go right in between the Steelers' 2 picks. And so I think he's kind of another indication there. And so the Steelers are just all over the map. And to me, that tells you, they're keeping all options open. They're doing a ton of due diligence, one. Second, I just think that they look at this and I think they want to trade back. They don't have many picks. They only have 6. They need more than that, in my opinion. And you look at the patterns here in terms of their interest. A lot of it has been circled around mid-round running backs, a lot of mid-round defensive tackles. But outside of that, I mean, you don't really have a ton there. And so I think trading back gives the Steelers a lot more flexibility to do what they want on day 2 and day 3. And I think they need that because they have enough needs to where you want to go BPA at a position of need at all those picks.
That's where I'm at. I think that there's a lot of opportunities for the Steelers to address several positions. And again, this is a team that has several different directions it could go. Needs it has, and good players to pick in this draft at several of those needs. You talked about Thomas. You talked about here guys at cornerback that I think could be really good for what they want to do. But it's tough for me to envision them picking an early round corner, considering I really think they need to go get a D tackle. I really think they need to go get a running back. And I wouldn't close the book on some other positions. They still need a quarterback somewhere in this draft class. That's where I think that there's I think that's where there's a lot of possibilities if they trade back for. Now, let's examine this another way here. Let's look at of the top 30 visits, and this is everyone, including the outside the first round guys. Who are some of the sleepers, or not the sleepers per se, but who are some of the guys that you think they didn't put a whole lot of attention on, but intentionally because they like them and they know enough about them that they might go after them?
Well, I think there's a few obvious candidates there. I think Kenneth Grant is one of them. It's not like they haven't shown interest in Kenneth Grant. They had a combine formal, and they did have Tomlin Khan did go to Ann Arbor the night before Pro Day. They weren't actually at the Pro Day, but Terrell Austin was there. So there's at least points of interest there. Emeka Egbuka is another one. They've just shown consistent interest throughout the cycle with. Again, because even though we know they like Jalen Milroe because they've talked to him at every point of the process, he didn't come in for a 30 visit, but they didn't need to. They had Senior Bowl Combine and Pro Day with him. There are a few names in there, I think, that make a lot of sense. And those are still scattered over, I think, different positions too in terms of first round interest. And so I think the Steelers are really casting about as wide of a net as I can remember, Chris. I mean, they really are going all over the place, all over the board for these guys. So even the guys they didn't bring, I think, you can look at different positions and tie them into different spots. And so I think that's fairly interesting on top of the already shown interest in the 30 visits.
No, I think you're right on there about is the fact that they have all these different targets they've looked at, the wide range. This does not feel like 2 years, like last year when I was like, they're going tackle. The year before that when I said they're going tackle and probably Broderick Jones. Or years ago when they went Najee Harris, and like I was banging on the table like they're going for Najee Harris. They really want this guy. This feels more like the Kenny Pickett year, which might alarm some people if you're not a first round quarterback guy. And I certainly have made my case that I'm not for this class. But this looks to me like there's a real opportunity for the Steelers to try to keep people off of them, to keep them sort of people off their trail, and that can be really helpful because when teams zero in on what they know what you're doing, then they can start to maneuver around you. They can trade up around you. They can trade back, and lose and get value. They can know that they can jump what you're trying to do. That's where you run into draft problems, and then that alters your draft plans. And again, I take people back. The example I often use is 2016. They really wanted a quarter. They really wanted William Jackson. The Bengals got ahead of them. They drafted William Jackson. They ended up with Artie Burns. Artie Burns was a complete bust. William Jackson turned out to not be the guy, but still it changed their plans. And it's why you need to be able to disguise yourself. Now, Omar Khan, I think, hasn't run into that problem just yet, but this is his third draft that he'll be running. I'm intrigued to see how does he handle it and how do other teams handle the way the Steelers have gone about scouting the draft process.
And I don't even think it's just a smokescreen teams, but it is that scenario, right? Let's say they are circled in and really like Kenneth Grant. Okay. And let's say Kenneth Grant goes before them. Well, they want to make sure they have the necessary work, not just on Derek Harmon, but on other options at other positions. Because in 2016, while the Steelers did need a corner, they didn't have to take a corner, right? They didn't have to 100% circle in on that. We've seen this happen before with the Steelers. In 2019, for example, that was all over the board too. But there were two bona fide first-round inside linebackers in Devin Bush and Devin White that were going to go before the Steelers. So they traded up to get them. I think this year the Steelers aren't really locked in on one guy. I know a lot of people have kind of pegged Kenneth Grant or Derek Harmon to be that, but it's clear as day they are preparing for everything. They have information on quarterback, running back, receiver, D-line, safety, edge. It doesn't matter. They have all of this information at the hands of their scouting staff. And so if there's a scenario where the guy they really want goes off the board, they can now sit there and say, we have done the homework on this entire class, this entire group, and we can take the best player available rather than panicking at a position of need just because we feel like we need it.
And I think that's where you have to be. And as much as I'm a person that I am one of those people that think that they should be zeroing in on Kenneth Grant or Derek Harmon. I think either one of those guys would be great additions to this team, be along the lines of what they need to do, address things short-term and long-term, and potentially get a pillar player there. But you got to be ready for, like in my big board, I rank both of those guys inside my top 15. I really think highly of them. And if the rest of the NFL sees it that way, or at least just two other teams see it that way, and they make plays on them, you better be ready to roll in case one of those guys aren't there, and not just take, a guy, a second round defensive tackle that you guys valued there, and get stuck with that situation. Right. So that's part of what the smoke screen's for. I want to talk about one of the players that people keep talking every day about. He's going to get taken higher. He's going to get taken lower. He's going to get taken higher. He's going to get taken lower. And that's Shedeur Sanders, which is one of the players the Steelers brought in for a top 30 visit. We'll talk about Shedeur Sanders, what's the word on him, and where we think he'll go next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Nick Farabaugh, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I remind you, this show is also brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip: add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture on LinkedIn, and you'll double your reach to qualified candidates. It's no wonder that 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Nick Farabaugh here with us from PennLive.com. Nick, let's talk about Shedeur Sanders. And I'm not just talking about should the Steelers pick him. I'm talking about where we think he actually goes, because I've heard every story at this point about every quarterback needy team that might make a move for him. The Browns, the Giants are interested. They're totally interested. They've already signed their quarterbacks. That's just to fool you. I've heard that. I've heard the Saints are super interested. I've heard the Saints actually just want an edge rusher, and they're not going to go for that. I've heard that every team wants. I heard the Steelers are absolutely going for Shedeur Sanders. Oh, there's no one's going for Shedeur Sanders. I have literally heard every take on this, Nick. So let's isolate ourselves from that. Let's look at talent-wise. Where should Shedeur Sanders go in this draft? We'll get to the will. Because will is always very much different than should. Where should he go in this draft class?
I think mid first round, late first round, somewhere around there sounds right to me. I think he's that type of talent. I think he's like a second round, top of the second round, middle of the second round talent, and you inflate that for quarterback. I think you put it right in about that spot. So that's where I think he should go. I think he has obvious limitations to his game. I think he has really good things you sell on and that make him the quarterback two of this group. And this class doesn't have a ton of blue chip talent up top either. So That helps. I think when you're talking about selling yourself on Shedeur and what he can do, can he change your franchise, et cetera, et cetera. But that's kind of where I view him as. I view him as probably that mid first round, late first round type of quarterback in this group.
See, that's where I kind of am too, is that, like, I think I even have him as a second round quarterback. I do not think that he is. I think that the things that limit him put him in situation. Now, so that's the should. We're both on the should as far as he's not a top 10 pick. He's more of a middle to late to maybe outside the first round type of prospect. But where will he go? That's always different, because there's always teams that want to reach for quarterbacks. Like, for example, I did not think J.J. McCarthy was the 10th, 11th, wherever spot he was picked in his draft class. I did not think he was that range as far as like on my big board of how good of a player that he was. I thought that I think that there's times like that happen all the time. I think Kenny Pickett wasn't in my top 20 as far as my big board. The Steelers took him, but I look at this, Nick, and then I do wonder about these QB needy teams. Of the teams in the top 10, do you feel like there's teams that are definitely going to make a plug, or do you think that all these teams are just playing us right now? They're saying what people want to hear, and they're just going to go about their business, pick the best position players available, and Shedeur Sanders does fall outside the top 10.
I buy the Shedeur fall. I kind of do. I don't think he's going to go to the Giants. I think the Giants are going to look at one of those other top players, probably Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter. I think one of those two is can't miss. I think the Saints are in a weird spot where they could take Shedeur. I think they're the likeliest spot in the top 10 for him. I do. With the Derek Carr stuff going on, who knows what's going to happen there. But I also think they got to sell themselves on Shedeur being not just a good quarterback, but the guy that changes your franchise around, right? They got to sell him on that. If they have a clear vision for him there, similar to how the Broncos did with Bo Nix, because a lot of the league didn't view Bo Nix as where he went either, but the Broncos had a clear vision for him, and they said, we can do this. We think he can be a game changer, and they took him. If the Saints think that of Shedeur, then he'll go there. If not, my guess is actually where he's going to go is I think the Giants are an interesting spot, but not at 3. Trading back up into the first round, I think is an interesting proposition. I think the Saints, I think if the Browns really like Shedeur too, I could see the Browns, if they take Travis Hunter at 2, wanting to come back up into round 1 and pairing him and Shedeur again, because they view Travis Hunter reportedly as a wide receiver. So that also could add into the intrigue there. So I think actually what ends up happening is, Chris, I think one of those 3 teams, the Giants, the Browns, or the Saints, come back up into the 20s or early or late teens and get Shador Sanders in a trade scenario. That's what I think.
That would be very interesting, because then also now, okay, let's put it this way. Should the Steelers be one of those teams that talk to them about that? Because we've talked about the Steelers wanting to invest in next year's quarterback class. If you're trading up into the first round, from the second round, most likely you're not giving up a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, to try to make up that compensation all there. And I don't think you're not actually allowed to get past 3 picks there. So that would kill that. But if you're trading up from the second to get into the first, and the Steelers are only getting back a second round pick, and that does help their second round pick range, they would need something. If you're the Steelers, would you entertain that to maybe get an extra first next year to try to save up for that quarterback then?
I would. I would think about it. And I also do think it's a little tough to see the Steelers being the team trading back from there, because I think if I'm the Giants or Browns, I want to get ahead of Pittsburgh. So I would call Denver or Tampa Bay more so than I would call Pittsburgh. But if the Steelers kind of put out the feelers and say, hey, we're not locked in here. What you guys are competing against is not us. You're competing against each other. That's the scenario. And so I don't know. I think the Steelers could maybe get, if New York comes up, instead of offering their 1 next year, wants to come up for 34 and I think 65 they have. I believe they have 65. That's an interesting trade scenario, because then you have an early second, an early third plus year pick at 83. So I think that would be an interesting idea too. Would you trade back to the second round to get an early third round pick? And the Giants' third is the very first third round pick. So you would pick at the very top of that third round. So if you are worried about filling defensive tackle, for example, because you're not going to take one in round 1, or you don't love them, well, at 65, it's not crazy to think Darius Alexander is still on the board. It's not crazy to think you have a really good player like Azareye'h Thomas fall to you. You can get a really good player at 65. And so I think that's the juice worth the squeeze, right? There might be 2 different scenarios you can go. You can either build capital for 26, or you can get an extra second and third round pick potentially in 25 to add to the now. So I think there's different calculations there.
I want to bring up something that you alluded to there, because this is going to be my next question for you. The Steelers being able to get a team to trade with them if it is Shador Sanders, because when you look at all the teams behind them in the first round, Chargers, Justin Herbert, Packers, Jordan Love, Vikings, J.J. McCarthy, Texans, CJ Stroud. Rams, Matt Stafford. Maybe you could say Rams because Matt Stafford's old. But Ravens, Lamar Jackson. Lions, Jared Goff. Commanders, Jaden Daniels. Bills, Josh Allen. Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts. All these teams got starting quarterbacks lined up for them right now. So who are you trying to get ahead of? And I think that's your point, though, is you already answered this question. You're trying to get these teams to get ahead of each other because they really do want Shedeur Sanders and they want to make that move to be aggressive there. So that's where I think things could get really interesting, Nick, is if the Steelers are able to drum up a market and they're able to get, a second and a third this year or a first next year to back it up. I could live with that. I think in that situation. Now, I always trading out of the first round is always like a big red flag for me. I'm like, okay, I got to stop the presses and I got to actually read the fine print of this deal, because to me, you never want to pass on actual first round talent, because that's the stuff that helps you build your organization, especially with the lack of first round talent the Steelers have hit on in the past several drafts. So if you're gonna do that, you better be sure that you're getting the right value for those guys with those second and third round picks there. So, but again, to your point, maybe that's more on the table than people realize when you look at the top 30 visits and the receivers they've looked at, the running backs they've looked at, the cornerbacks that they've looked at. Maybe that is the spot that they're looking to fall into.
Yeah, I think it's a pocket for them where they don't have to kind of take a guy at 21 if they don't love that guy. And I think that's the interesting thing for them. Now, if they do trade out of the first round, we have seen this, and I say this because Andy Weidel comes from the Eagles. I've seen Howie Roseman do this before, where he goes out of the first, gets capital, and then comes right back up into the late first round, where he does the double, gets that extra second day pick, and you come up for a day 3. Could that happen? I think it's a little more galaxy brain than that for Steelers. But if there's a guy that falls maybe that far to 31 and say, I don't know, Derek Harmon's still there, and they're like, we got to get Derek Harmon. And what if he falls? Then maybe you try and say, we'll do the double move. So there's a lot of calculations you can do with these trades. You can really go galaxy brain with it. But I think when we talk about these 30 visits, the interest they've had, trading back into that late first, that early second round range to accrue more draft capital to fill some more needs makes a lot of sense for them. It's just going to be finding that right position, that right kind of partner to get it done with, because I do have some skepticism about the trades in this class period, just because the class is not viewed in kind of vein as some of the previous ones, just because of the lack of top end talent.
I feel you on that. I think we're smoking something. We feeling this right here. I think I could definitely see there's a path for this. And again, I've been on the trade back train for a bit now. If one of those guys that you think is truly 21, be willing to move back, get ready to move back. And it doesn't have to be for Shedeur Sanders. That's where this topic starts. That's where this segment started out with. But it could be for anyone. And I think that's where you might find some real competition is for a team like the Bills, the Chiefs, that say like, hey, you know what, we really need this player. The Chargers, Packers, Vikings, Texans, all of them guys. One of those teams might get this guy. We really need to get him. Steelers, here's a day 2 pick, like an early third round pick, a late second round pick, something along those lines, to move up 9 spots or so in the first round and go get that guy. I think that's something that should be on the table for the Steelers. But a team trading out of the first round to go back up, that could be really interesting. Shedeur Sanders could be the wild card of this draft class, just not in the way that some Steelers fans think as far as the player that they pick, but he might be the instrument that they use to propel a trade that gets them the real value that they really see in this draft class.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing is when you look at the trade back scenarios, they just give you that option, right, Chris? And that's what you want. You want flexibility. You want maximum flexibility. And I think the Steelers in this class, based on their visits, based on their interest, based on the needs they have, just because they have wide receiver, running back, quarterback, D-line, corner, safety, all these different needs that they have kind of focused on, the idea of trading back means that they can fill in one more of those needs. That's the key thing here is they get more flexibility. And offensive line, I think, it's kind of the key position I think about when I talk about the trade back, honestly, Chris, because every time I go through a draft, I want to take an offensive tackle or guard because the Steelers are going to have depth needs or a starting need there next year. And I don't feel like they can do it without an extra pick. Maybe if you trade back, you can get a guard, just like they did with Mason McCormick last year, and draft for the future. That good teams draft for future needs. They don't draft for immediate needs. I think the Steelers need to start, as they build up this team, need to start thinking about that in that way. And I think that's a smart way to go about it.
Well, that's a great segue because I want to talk about the future and a topic that's come up a lot, and that's the potential for the Steelers passing on this quarterback class as far as finding a starter, maybe drafting a backup, and looking to the 2026 class. Let's talk about that 2026 class because we still don't know what it's going to be, but there's some things that have been happening in the news that suggest that, hey, maybe it's a little different than what people have been talking about. We'll talk about that next year on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Nick Farabaugh, stick with us. We will be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many different ways for you to bet on your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live player prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today when you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. That's $250 in bonus bets if you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. Only the new customers at FanDuel.com. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter, Nick Farabaugh of PennLive.com. Nick, let's talk about the 2026 quarterback draft class that isn't yet. And I want to make this clear. It is not there. We do not know for sure who's going to be there. But as I've been saying for months now, and even years almost, because it's basically been talking about quarterback draft classes for the near future, I did not think the 2025 class would be the ideal situation for the Steelers to try to get their franchise quarterback. I think that 2026 potentially could be that draft class if the guys are there. Now, some of the big names that people have talked about and then I've talked about potentially being there: Arch Manning, of course, of Texas, the next coming of the Manning line, Nico Iamaleava out of Tennessee, Drew Aller out of Penn State, Garrett Nussmeier, LSU, LaNorris Sellers out of South Carolina. All these guys have projections that could be there. But of course, Nick, there was big news over the weekend with Nico Iamaleava out of Tennessee not showing up for spring practices, and now he's not on the team anymore. And he's a guy that you're not sure where he's going to be next year. And not that eliminates his value, because, players and NIL and seeking your best NIL deal, that's up to you and how you do it. That's a whole other situation. But if Iamaleava has to go to a new team next year and maybe he doesn't just light it up right away with his new team, and he stays in the draft, he could be off the board. And then Arch Manning, it's been said that Arch Manning might want to stay back another year anyways, just because he wasn't the primary starter this season. So then you're left with maybe Drew Aller, maybe LaNorris Sellers, maybe Nussmeier or Cade Klubnik out of Clemson. And so I ask you, Nick, when you look at this draft class, how confident do you still feel that this could be a group that the Steelers should want to be in on, rather than being another group that they want to pass up on next year?
Yeah, I mean, from people in the league I've talked to, they really like the class already. So there's at least some endorsements from the NFL. This time last year, the NFL did not like the 25 class. So
exactly,
it was that. So they do like this 26 class a little more. Listen, you mentioned the guy, Cade Klubnik. He played his best football down the stretch for Clemson. I think he's a really interesting player.
Mm-hmm.
There are a number of players in this class that could be sleepers. I've heard some guys mention Fernando Mendoza, who transferred from Cal to Indiana, as an interesting piece in that group. I've heard some other names thrown around. Iamaleava is a really interesting type of player because he, honestly, on tape last year, he struggled at times, but man, he could spin that. He can really throw it. He's got great mobility. He's got the ability to do things. I think actually potentially him getting out of that Tennessee offense, because it's so hard to evaluate players from the Tennessee offense, just because it's so unlike the pro offenses they will run in the NFL.
Up tempo, and
it could help him. It could help his it could maybe not his production, but his translatability. I think that is possible. So we'll see. I like some guys. Nussmeier's got tools. Aller's got tools. I think Arch obviously has a ton of tools. We haven't seen Arch play more than 100 snaps, so we'll see how that turns out. But the 100 snaps that he has played has a lot of really good flashes on it. And then LaNorris Sellers is like awesome, dude. Just a
I
bowling
love
ball.
LaNorris Sellers, man.
Oh my goodness, he's such a fun player. There are so many guys that I didn't even name that you could throw in there. Sam Leavitt from Arizona State has some interesting things to his resume, I think. There are a lot of interesting players in that group. So there's possibility of guys just coming out of nowhere and I think making a name for themselves, which is good. That builds the depth of the class. And on top of that, I think there is a number of guys that will be there. So the Steelers very well, when they trade up, for example, if they trade up from the 20s, like where they are now, if we just assume they're going to pick there, they might be trading up for QB 3 or 4, but QB 3 or 4 this next year very well might have been QB1 this year, and that's important for context. So I'm not saying we're going to get a 2024 repeat where 6 went in the top 12 like it was.
3 in the first 3 picks.
Right. Like, that's crazy. But I do think it's certainly possible that there is a legit depth to the class next year of first-round quarterbacks, and the Steelers will have that chance. So I do think, I know a lot of people say waiting year's not, the antidote necessarily. You don't know. It's true, but right now, basically all the thoughts from the league, insiders, et cetera, that does sound like they believe 2026 is going to be a better class. So I think it's better to crack on that than reach in this class for, in my opinion, guys that I look at that aren't going to be franchise changers.
I'm right with you. I think when you're going for quarterback, a franchise quarterback in the first round, you're looking for a guy that could be a franchise game changer, like a guy who's going to he's once he like Jaden Daniels, you plug him in, he going rock. And like Ben, again, I think that the whole idea that the Steelers should be committing to right now is building your roster. Because listen, building your roster is like going to the gym, right? Like, it don't matter if you gotta be in a swimsuit this summer or not. You're just taking care of your health. That's the whole point here. You may not get that chance to show off your summer body, but you want to get ready just because that's the most important thing. And for the Steelers, your primary concern should be getting your roster right. And if you don't get your quarterback next year, that's another bridge that you have to cross. You'll cross it when you get there. But again, reaching on a quarterback that you do not feel is your game changer, and that legitimately is not your game changer this year, isn't going to help you whether or not the quarterback is available next year. Because let's say Nick, none of this happens. Sellers doesn't come out. Iamaleava, he's out. Manny doesn't come out. Nussmeier's bad. Aller's bad. Let's say that we're going into next year like, man, this turned out to be a botch. What would be a better situation if the Steelers took a quarterback that they didn't that isn't really a franchise game changer last year, or that they got a stud at a position of need that was properly valued and they're still building towards being a more complete roster, just still missing their quarterback? To me, it's the version where you don't have that quarterback, but you do have that pick that you invested in to get the guy that you need to help build your foundation.
Right. And here's the thing. I think if I say this all the time, if the Steelers were in the NFC, I think taking a floor quarterback, a high floor, maybe lower ceiling quarterback, which is something kind of like what I view Shedeur Sanders as. I don't think the ceiling is incredibly high, but I think he's going to be a really solid starter. Like, that's what I think he's going to be. I think if you're playing for floor, in the NFC, that's going to play. There's not really a lot of game-changing quarterbacks in the NFC. You have a great roster and a solid quarterback that keeps you afloat, you can win playoff games. In the AFC, you got to face Mahomes, Jackson, Allen, all these guys, Burrow, Herbert, Stroud. Like, there are just guys all across this. For the Steelers to go on a Super Bowl run, they're going to have to win against Jackson, then Burrow, then Mahomes, or Allen, then Mahomes. Like, it is a gauntlet. And so if you want to compete with those guys in the AFC, if you want to come out of the AFC and be a Super Bowl contending team, a big time part of that is you got to be having a game changer at quarterback, not just a floor raiser. Look at the Miami Dolphins. Tua Tagovailoa is a completely solid quarterback. He's a good player. The issue is, every year, they just can't outgun those teams. Now, they have other flaws on their roster, but they don't have that quarterback that can take over and get to that next level. And I think that's what the Steelers would find themselves in with someone like Shedeur Sanders. They would have a solid quarterback and a guy that I think would bring stability to their room. I just don't view him, for example, or Jackson Dart even. I don't view either of those two as guys that are going to come in and say, man, they are going to break this open. You're going to have a guy that goes toe for toe with all these absolute cyborg quarterbacks in the AFC. The Steelers need a ceiling raiser, not just a floor raiser at quarterback. And that's the key, I think, when you're looking at where they sit and what you're looking for a quarterback.
By Jove, he's got it. I agree with you, Nick Farabaugh. That's where it's got to be. And I think, again, that 2026 class, not saying it's definitely going to be there, but the prospect that it could be much higher than where it was last year. Again, I keep bringing it up. If you go back to the 2024 and when they were signing Russell Wilson and they were trading for Justin Fields, the plan was to get you through the 2025 season because you knew this draft class wasn't going to be good last year, like you pointed out, like the people in the NFL that you talked to. So all that being said, 2026 quarterback still where it's at, even if we don't know that it is actually there just yet. It's always gambling. And this year, I'd rather gamble on that than try to force myself into a situation that I look at and I evaluate and I say, that's not going to be the game changer situation. But he's Nick Farabaugh. I'm Chris Carter. Thanks so much for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. Nick, let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at FarabaughFB. Make sure to follow me at Blue Sky at Nick Farabaugh. Make sure to read the stuff over at PennLive.com and subscribe to the YouTube channel, Steelers Blitz on Penn Live.
Absolutely. He's Nick Farabaugh. I'm Chris Carter. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the social media, same handle everywhere at Carter Critiques. You can read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. You can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down the Pittsburgh Steelers. Back here tomorrow with more on the Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.